As I reflect on my journey, the first clear recognition I had of the toxic nature of my relationship came in the form of red flags, those subtle yet powerful signals that hinted something was seriously wrong. This awakening didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, akin to the slow but inevitable rise of sunlight after a long, dark night. The initial moments of confusion and doubt eventually shifted into clarity as I began to piece together the patterns that had been woven into the fabric of my daily life. At first, it was easy to dismiss my partner's need for control as just a quirk of personality. Perhaps it was rooted in his past, I told myself. I often engaged in a mental gymnastics routine to rationalize my partner's actions, the dismissiveness of my opinions, the constant border patrol of my social life, the way he subtly belittled my achievements and interests under the guise of suggestions for improvement. It felt almost like a hypnotic dance, one that lulled me into a false sense of security, making it difficult to recognize the vivid colors of emotional abuse fading into shadowy grays of manipulation. Isolation, as it turned out, was one of the first red flags that waved its alarming banner in front of me. Friends began to drift away, not because I wanted them to, but because he made certain that any interaction outside of our relationship would be met with passive-aggressive comments or outright disapproval. "Why do you need to spend time with them when you could be here with me?" he would say, a seemingly innocent inquiry masked in concern. The more it happened, the more I felt the walls close in, fostering a sense of dependence on just one person, my partner, which only deepened my unease. In retrospect, the pattern echoes like a haunting song from history, the way powerful leaders in ancient societies sometimes distanced their people from outside influences. Just as an Inca ruler might have sought to keep power consolidated by minimizing contact with rival tribes, my partner's attempts to control our social dynamics served a similar purpose. Each occurrence chipped away at my individuality, leaving fragments of doubt in its wake. I lost not just friends but also pieces of myself. Next came the manipulation, a red flag that flapped noisily against the backdrop of my life. It was less about overt aggression and more about the mind games that twisted my reality. The confusion was palpable. I would express discomfort over certain behaviors only to find my concerns dismissed. "You're too sensitive," he would say, conveniently turning it back on me. These kinds of exchanges planted seeds of self-doubt that blossomed into full-blown insecurities. The energy once spent on passion and joy in our relationship gradually drained, replaced instead with a nagging feeling that I was living under a microscope, where every word and action was scrutinized and often criticized. Another insidious element, one that often goes unnoticed, is the emotional volatility, a constant state of chaos that makes you question your own sanity. I would tiptoe around his moods, praying that the volatile storms of temper would not rage on a day when I simply wished to talk or share a laugh. His anger could be explosive, yet the aftermath would leave me crying alone, trying to piece together the reasoning behind this cycle. There was a particular instance when I planned a dinner for us, excitedly preparing his favorite meal, only for him to explode over a minor mishap with the dessert. The humiliation felt suffocating, and I found myself apologizing profusely, accepting the blame for a situation that shouldn't have been my responsibility. The emotional highs and lows began to resemble a roller coaster I longed to exit, but the thrill of presence and affection always beckoned me back. Where did the affection go when things calmed down? It existed, but it felt devoid of the earlier sincerity that had drawn us together. Frequent apologies were followed by grand gestures, temporary peace, and then yet another descent into conflict. It was déjà vu on repeat, each cycle blurring the lines between love and control, comfort and anxiety. As this roller coaster continued, rationalization became my close companion. I reasoned that maybe this was part of love, that passion came hand in hand with these storms. After all, some claim that every relationship has its challenges. But deep down, I began to understand that love shouldn't feel like a perpetual battle, nor should it leave me feeling more drained than fulfilled. The nurturing aspects of relationships, Support, understanding, empathy were nowhere in sight, eclipsed by a looming darkness that fed only on my fears and uncertainties. Mental exhaustion from enduring emotional instability in my relationship made it difficult to connect the dots. It fed into a systemic breakdown of confidence, elongating my wake-up call. I realized that love doesn't thrive in chaos, it flourishes in safety, mutual respect, and trust. The myths I told myself began to unravel, displaying a far more frightening truth about the nature of my relationship. I started recognizing the urgency to change our dynamic. Meanwhile, something deeper was shifting within me, a seed of self-worth beginning to sprout, better equipped to take charge of my own narrative. As this realization dawned, I became more attuned to the red flags that had previously eluded my grasp. Every small moment previously brushed off as just how he is now held significant meaning. Little by little, I learned to trust my instincts again. Those instincts that once told me to stand up for myself, to voice my opinions, to declare my worth. This renewal of self-awareness marked the early days of my journey toward liberation, away from the toxic grip that had ensnared me for too long. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges and change, yet the prospect of true happiness began to glimmer through the fog. It all came to a head one afternoon, the kind of day that feels just like any other yet bears the weight of a lifetime behind it. I remember it vividly. The sunlight was pouring into the room, illuminating corners that had been shrouded in shadows for far too long. It was in that moment that I found myself inexplicably holding my breath, caught between my past and an uncertain future. How does one come to a breaking point, you might wonder? Often, it's a series of small moments that accumulate like mountains of unspoken grievances, leading to a peak that feels unscalable. In the days and weeks leading up to that pivotal afternoon, I had been experiencing a sense of disquiet, a nagging feeling that intensified with each passing interaction. The toxic undertones of my relationship had manifested in subtle manipulations, criticism cloaked in the guise of concern, and promises that were seemingly designed to keep me tethered to a happiness that felt more like a mirage. I smiled on the outside, but on the inside I was suffocating. It's important to note that recognizing toxicity isn't an instantaneous epiphany. It's often a slow, painful peeling away of delusions. That day, as I stood in the kitchen, a simple task of preparing dinner morphed into an electrifying confrontation. The argument emerged out of nowhere, igniting like dry grass on a match. "You always overreact," he had said, dismissing my feelings with a wave of his hand. In that instant, I realized something profound. I was no longer willing to play the victim in my own story. I was tired of being labeled as the crazy one, the one who was never able to articulate her own feelings without being met with contempt. Historical narratives often speak of empires crumbling under the weight of oppression, which is somewhat akin to an individual crumbling under the weight of a suffocating relationship. As I stood there, elbows deep in marinated chicken, I felt an eerie kinship with the Assyrians who once ruled with an iron fist, only to discover that their tyrannies would one day lead to their downfall. After what felt like an eternity, in reality it was only a few seconds, I looked at him directly in the eye. "Enough," I said, my voice steadier than I had anticipated. The word echoed in the space between us, a concrete marker signaling my resolve. It was here, in this domestic battleground, that I recognized that the chains binding me were only as strong as I allowed them to be. I had been navigating the treacherous waters of emotional manipulation, a threshold that so many of us find ourselves in, often convincing ourselves that love must bear the weight of sacrifice and suffering. But is that really love, or is it merely an illusion we cling to during our darkest days? What followed was a cacophony of feelings: rage, sadness, relief, but also a flicker of clarity. The truth began to materialize against the backdrop of my emotional storm. The world outside this home, the sun setting low on the horizon, was a stark contrast to the chaos erupting within. I could almost hear the whispers of those who had left toxic situations before me, their stories intertwining with my own. It was in their narratives that I gleaned the wisdom of self-worth and autonomy, both foreign concepts in my current existence. Yet, if the resilient Inca walls could withstand the test of time and conquer insurmountable odds, so too could I. The idea of enough was not simply about being exhausted by emotional upheaval. It was also a line drawn in the sand, a boundary I had failed to establish for so long. In that moment, I forged a silent pact with myself. The road would be rocky, littered with isolation and fear of the unknown, but it was mine to traverse. A centuries-old tradition held in the Incan belief system emerged in my mind, the idea of Pachamama or Mother Earth, the embodiment of nurturing and abundance. All at once, I realized I needed to create a nurturing environment for myself, a sanctuary where I could bloom unfettered. My relationship had stunted my personal growth, much like invasive species often suffocate native flora. As I took a deep breath and grounded myself in this newfound revelation, the oppressive weight of the relationship felt lighter, transformative even. In the aftermath of that confrontation, every single conversation felt different. The fog that had clouded my insight began to clear, revealing a landscape filled with possibilities. I began to see the value of my own voice, even if it trembled with uncertainty. With each moment of resistance, I felt a growing sense of liberation. It became increasingly clear that the stories I had internalized, of love, failure, and misery, would no longer define my narrative. Instead, I would be the author of my own journey, choosing to rewrite the script in a language of empowerment rather than despair. What followed in the weeks after that moment of clarity was a period of significant introspection. I found myself reflecting on the aspects of the relationship that had brought me happiness, and those that had plunged me into despair. Tearing apart this emotional tapestry was as complex as analyzing the woven patterns of ancient Incan textiles, rich in history yet often obscured by layers of time. Yet as I unraveled it, I began to stitch together a more authentic version of myself, where love didn't equate to loss, and happiness didn't come packaged with conditions. It's crucial to acknowledge that reaching this breaking point wasn't merely about me. It was ultimately about recognizing my own worth. Much like the civilizations that had flourished in the ruins of past empires, I too was determined to rise from the ashes of a toxic connection. That afternoon had been the beginning of my emergence. Enough was indeed enough. And in that simple yet profound realization, I began the journey toward finding what true happiness could mean for me, free of shadows and limitations. As I sit down to reflect on the emotional tapestry I've woven throughout my journey, I often find myself entranced by the vivid patterns of love and pain that have marked my life. It's fascinating how our memories, like threads, can intertwine to create a rich narrative, one that is both beautiful and haunting. Each relationship we encounter, especially those that are toxic, leaves an indelible mark on our psyche. These emotions, whether they bloom like vibrant flowers or darken like storm clouds, are significant pieces of what shapes us. Let me take you back to the early days of my relationship. It began with butterflies. You know, that exhilarating feeling when everything feels right. Those initial sparks of infatuation can feel like the universe aligning just for you, unveiling a future filled with promise. I remember the warmth that enveloped me, the hope that swirled around like fragrant incense, inviting me to breathe deeply. Love in its truest form is intoxicating. But as I would come to learn, sometimes the most mesmerizing spells can hide darker truths beneath their surface. As the clouds lifted and the days turned into months, the vibrant colors of our shared joy began to fade. Shadows crept in, quietly at first, like a subtle change in the weather. Criticism started to replace affection, and those moments filled with laughter morphed into exchanges packed with tension. My heart was a patchwork quilt, fraying at the edges, sewn together with memories of better times and the looming threat of despair. It was then, smothered by the weight of unrelenting negativity, that I started exploring the history of my emotional landscape. Think about it. Isn't it intriguing how our own stories echo the broader human experience? Each of us, in our own way, is an intricate tapestry crafted from the threads of our narratives. With each painful memory I stitched into this fabric, pieces of me began to unravel. We often romanticize love, putting it on a pedestal while inadvertently ignoring the profound pain it can inflict. I was no different, believing that suffering could somehow transform into strength, unaware that strength also meant recognizing when to walk away. As my emotional landscape became rocky, I found myself oscillating between love and hurt, a dance that felt intoxicating yet suffocating. In my heart, I knew the moments of joy were overshadowed by the scars of hurtful words and ignoring boundaries. This painful contrast created a complex emotional tapestry, each thread representing a time. I had chosen to overlook my own needs in favor of maintaining the harmony of a toxic bond. It's as if I had willingly participated in my own undoing, much like a weaver trapped by their own loom. This visceral experience reminds me of the ancient civilizations that thrived by creating intricate tapestries. In particular, the Inca Empire practiced an art that fascinated me greatly. They used colors, symbols, and patterns to tell stories of their lives, beliefs, and struggles. The art of weaving for the Incas wasn't just a profession, it was a representation of identity itself. Each woven piece was a history, a blend of myth and reality telling a story of survival against the harshness of their world, much like how I felt striving to survive in my own emotional turmoil. But let's pause for a moment. A tapestry is not merely a collection of threads lined together. It requires intention. Each choice we make, each action we take influences the overall design. Christening this tapestry of love and pain became a ritual for me, and through it I began to discern the patterns that dictated my responses to my partner's outbursts, criticisms, and moods. One day, amidst this introspection, I stumbled upon a critical insight. I had become a mere reflection of his emotions, surrendering my identity at the altar of his whims. It's sobering, really. In the pursuit to be loving and supportive, I had unwittingly trapped myself in a role that demanded my own happiness be sacrificed. The emotional weight began to feel unbearable, and yet the threads were too tightly interwoven to cut cleanly. This moment of clarity became pivotal. It was as if a nagging rustle from within ignited a realization, just like the ancient Andean sages who spoke of signs from the gods. I just needed to step back and examine the greater tapestry of my life. Memories of love together had painted over the pain, creating a glowing allure that made it hard to see the reality of my situation. Celebrating our anniversary, special dates filled with laughter and spontaneous adventures painted my mind with laughter-laden hues, the sweetness of our connection. Yet each beautiful thread was countered by darker shades, the late-night arguments, the dismissive remarks, the crawling doubts. With each misstep, a knot tightened in my heart, threatening to unravel the joy held within those precious memories. It became increasingly clear that I had to confront the lies I told myself about love and the reality of our relationship. In the end, the emotional tapestry I crafted wasn't a reflection of a love story alone, it became a testament to my resilience. Each tear, each broken thread, told not only of loss but also of a gradual awakening. The pain etched into this tapestry gave way to a stronger, wiser fabric of self. I began to see the portrait that was emerging, one of strength formed through the process of unweaving the toxic bonds I had shackled myself to. This is where the real conversation begins, transforming from personal reflection to shared understanding. Many of us create these intricate emotional tapestries, believing they define who we are or who we will become. As we peel back the layers, however, we discover that these memories, whether joyful or sorrowful, should not define us but rather inform us. They serve as guides, helping us navigate the ebb and flow of our interpersonal dynamics. In sharing my story, I hope to encourage others to recognize their own tapestries, to embrace the complexity of their feelings while being mindful of the threads they allow into their lives. For hidden amid the beauty of love can lie difficult lessons that pave the path to self-discovery, healing, and, ultimately, true happiness. Just as the Inca people recognized the value of every thread in their tapestries, so too must we celebrate each moment, painful or joyous, as an integral part of the journey toward a life full of authenticity and fulfillment. The day I made the decision to walk away from that toxic relationship was not marked by a dramatic showdown or a grand epiphany. Rather, it unfolded like a subtle yet powerful revelation. It was a quiet moment, perched on the cusp of chaos and clarity, where fear and self-awareness danced in a delicate balance. You see, for a long time, I had allowed the weight of my partner's expectations and demands to overshadow my own desires and needs. Timid whispers of self-doubt crept into my thoughts, gnawing away at my self-worth until I could hardly remember who I was outside of the confines of that relationship. Choosing myself yet feeling an instinctual gravity toward fear was a paradox I grappled with daily. The world often tells us that love means sacrifice, that commitment is synonymous with surrender. But as I stood on the precipice of my decision, I began to unravel the truth behind those seemingly innocent narratives. I realized that love should not strip away my individuality or drown out my voice. Rather, it should amplify our shared virtues and foster a sense of joy that resonates deeply within. As I deliberated, I considered the stories of countless individuals who navigated similar crossroads, each fraught with uncertainty. I listened closely to their voices and learned from their journeys. Much like the Inca Empire, whose intricate stonework symbolized strength and resilience, I understood that my foundation had to be just as robust. The Incas faced their own trials, standing firm against adversities like environmental fluctuations and political strife, yet they flourished by building a society rooted in cooperation and respect. This resonated with me. I recognized that my healing required a similar spirit of tenacity and unity, not just within my heart but as a reflection of the support I sought from my surroundings. Confronting my fears did not mean dismissing their presence. On the contrary, it entailed recognizing them as valid emotions, acknowledging their attempts to guard me from the unknown. But then it struck me. Fear is often the desperate protector of our comfort zones, whispering sweet nothings that paralyze us from pursuing what we truly deserve. It results in a stifling cycle where we cling desperately to familiarity even when it devastates our spirit. But what if instead of yielding to that fear I chose to confront it head-on? What if I were to reclaim the narrative, rewrite my story as a protagonist and not just a supporting character in someone else? I embarked on a journey within myself, in search of the answers that eluded me. I reflected on my past achievements, the moments when I stood against the tide and emerged stronger. Just like the Inca builders carving their majestic structures from raw stone, I had the ability to reshape my life, chiseling away the redundant blocks of pain until all that remained was a sturdy edifice of self-love and empowerment. I began crafting my vision. What did choosing myself truly look like? It manifested not just in physical terms of leaving, but also in cultivating personal joy, embracing my individuality and setting boundaries that honored my emotional health. To truly choose myself, I had to strip away the voices of doubt and despair that clouded my judgment. This required intentional yet compassionate confrontation with the narratives ingrained within me that suggested I was unworthy of happiness or fulfillment. In ancient cultures like that of the Incas, spiritual alignment and harmony with oneself were paramount to thriving. If I were to emulate that understanding, I would have to align my actions with my heart's desire for freedom and joy. Gradually, the fog began to lift. I envisioned a life unmarred by the shadows of criticism and contempt. I felt empowered, understanding that I was not just walking away from someone but stepping toward my own light. The thought crystallized: choosing myself over fear meant embracing discomfort. It meant accepting that, while stepping into the unknown could be daunting, the potential for growth and happiness outweighed the hazardous familiarity I was leaving behind. In those pivotal moments of decision-making, I often turned to the power of visualization. I painted vivid pictures in my mind of what my future could entail: laughter with friends under the stars, quiet moments of reflection in a peaceful space, and the exhilarating pursuit of passions long set aside. I imagined waking up each morning with a sense of purpose, with the knowledge that I was in control of my destiny. The more I elaborated on that vision, the more real it became, transforming from mere fantasy into a magnetic force that propelled me forward. Soon, the chatter of fear grew quieter. I discovered that with each passing day, I felt stronger, motivated not by the desire to escape temporary discomfort, but by the aspiration to cultivate lasting joy. Much like explorers who set sail toward new horizons in search of uncharted lands, I felt the stirring urge to venture beyond the confines of my established reality and redefine what was possible. The decision to choose myself was not a linear path. It was a winding road filled with relapses of fear and apprehension. Each time my mind wandered back to the familiar territory of anxiety, I consciously redirected my thoughts, affirmed my worth, and embraced the adventure ahead, an ongoing process of growth and metamorphosis. It taught me the importance of compassion, not only toward myself but also in understanding the complex emotions entwined within the fabric of toxic dynamics. Ultimately, the strength to choose myself over fear blossomed from a nurturing dialogue with my inner self. and empowerment that reverberated through my being. Just as the archaeological marvels of the Inca culture remind us of the human capacity to create beauty amidst adversity, my journey towards self-liberation became a testament to my resilience and capacity for change. I was ready to reclaim my story, to let go of the past burdens, and to embrace a future filled with hope and possibility. In choosing myself, I was not merely walking away. I was stepping into the fullness of my own existence, setting the stage for what true happiness could be. In our lives, we often underestimate the power of a support system. It's something we might take for granted, those loyal friends, the relatives who seem to always understand what we need, even when we can't articulate it ourselves. But when push comes to shove, when we find ourselves standing at the precipice of monumental change, these relationships become our lifelines. They are the breath of fresh air that helps clear the fog of toxic entanglements. When I finally made the decision to walk away from my toxic relationship, it was like stepping out of a dimly lit cave into the sunlight after years of darkness. This was not just a solitary battle. It became clear to me that I wasn't walking this path alone. I began to recognize the friendships I had cultivated over the years, the family ties I often overlooked, and the love that was waiting patiently in the shadows, eager to envelop me in support and understanding. In these moments of transition, the importance of a robust support system cannot be overstated. These are the people who validate your feelings, those who remind you that leaving was not just an option, it was an essential step toward your well-being. They provide not only emotional backing, but also practical advice and insight based on their own experiences. It's fascinating to see how interconnected our lives become as we draw strength from each other, transforming pain into collective solidarity. Reflecting on my own journey, I recall countless conversations with my closest friends. I would sit across from them, sometimes buried in despair, yet their unwavering belief in my ability to reclaim my life became a beacon of hope. They listened without judgment, engaged actively with my daily struggles, and offered perspectives I hadn't considered before. When I felt self-doubt creeping in, they would remind me of my worth, encouraging me to visualize a future filled with promise rather than past regrets. It's like the Inca civilization that thrived through unity. Just as they relied on the intricate networks of their cities and communities, I too discovered that I could lean on my own. Then there were family members, perhaps the best surprise of all. Their love, often taken for granted in our busy lives, emerged as a soft cushion during my most tumultuous times. As I reconnected with them, I realized how much they had wanted to support me through my struggles, even when I kept my hurt locked away. They became the touchstones, grounding me in the realities of love and acceptance, showing me that relationships could be both nurturing and empowering. Such a return to familial connections reminded me of the ways societies have historically relied on kinship, not just for survival but for emotional resilience as well. Conversing with my family about my experiences was sometimes daunting. However, revealing my vulnerabilities created a space for healing. This is a crucial aspect of any support system, tearing down the walls of pretense to let in understanding. Has anyone ever told you that vulnerability is strength? By exposing my fears and missteps to those who cared, I made room for their wisdom to enter. It's a shared human experience to fall, and I quickly learned that admitting to my pain did not make me weak. Rather, it forged deeper connections and engaged my loved ones in a way that was profoundly healing. The role of supportive figures expanded beyond my immediate circle of friends and family, encompassing support groups and even mentors who stepped forward during this pivotal time. Delving into literature and joining communities, both online and in person, who understood the struggles of leaving a toxic relationship added layers to my support network. I found solace in knowing that I wasn't alone in my experiences, but rather a part of a larger narrative that many others have walked before me. Let's take a moment to reflect on this idea. The Inca civilization, with its remarkable sense of community, thrived on collaboration. They constructed extensive road systems that connected distant regions, allowing for the exchange of ideas and resources. Similarly, forging connections with others who have endured similar battles fosters a composite strength that makes us incredibly resilient. Each story I encountered in these spaces reminded me of my own choices and fears, and I drew inspiration from others' journeys toward liberation. Nurturing my support system also involved understanding when to lean on them and when to stand firmly on my own. It's a delicate balance. I came to realize that while I had great love and support around me, part of my journey was about reclaiming my own voice and decision-making power. This realization was pivotal. I learned to articulate my needs without feeling guilty, distinguishing between calls for help that were necessary and moments when I had to embrace solitude as part of healing. Looking back at that period, it was powerful to witness how the fabric of my relationships evolved. Friends from different phases of my life began actively re-engaging, offering renewed perspectives and insights. This intricate web of relationships came together like an Incan tapestry, each thread uniquely contributing to the beautiful whole that now defined my existence. As I navigated through the aftermath of my toxic relationship, I actively chose to cultivate these cherished connections, grinding through the self-doubt that wanted to rear its head again. I learned to trust my friends' encouragement because they appreciated my strength, not for the pain I had endured, but for the person I was actively becoming. They each played a role in building me up, just as those ancient cultures once united to create lasting legacies. In conclusion, finding strength in a support system is an invaluable process, especially when navigating life-changing decisions. Whether it's friends who bring laughter, family that provides solace, or communities that foster hope, these connections create a foundation from which we can rise. Just as the Inca cultivated a society that thrived on interdependence, I too found my resilience through unity. It's a reminder that even in moments of solitude, we never truly walk alone. Each supportive voice echoes the truth of our worth, guiding us gently back to ourselves. So let's make a conscious effort to invest in our relationships, for it is in the embrace of others that we often discover the strength to embrace our own full potential. In the midst of turmoil, the clarity of purpose often emerges like a beacon in the fog. I remember that moment vividly. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the abyss. I had made my decision, but jumping into the unknown required more than just courage. It demanded a meticulously crafted plan. This was my escape plan, a roadmap toward regaining my freedom and reclaiming my life. First, I recognized the importance of gathering intelligence about my situation. Understanding my partner's patterns and behaviors had been a vital part of the relationship, and now, it would serve as a critical tool in my strategy. I began to observe more closely, noting the routines, the predictable reactions, and the vulnerabilities I could exploit. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about surviving and ensuring that my exit would be as smooth as possible. I started to quietly contemplate each interaction, assessing whether they leaned toward cooperation or confrontation. This was a delicate balance. I knew if I pushed too hard too fast, I could trigger a backlash that would set me back, potentially leading to a more dangerous situation. The next crucial component of my escape plan was establishing a safe space. I reached out to a few trusted friends who had always been supportive. Gathering those who knew my struggles provided me with a wealth of emotional resources. They became my cheerleaders, but they also served as strategists. We discussed potential locations where I could stay once I left, ensuring they were discreet and far enough away to provide the necessary distance from the chaos. I also took time to consider the logistics. This step was not just about physical safety. It involved planning how to disengage from shared responsibilities and belongings. I started compiling a list of essentials, documents, clothing, and personal items that I would need. This was a psychological exercise as much as a logistical one. Each item I packed symbolized a piece of my new beginning. Now let's talk about finances. In a toxic relationship, financial control often becomes a tool for manipulation. I realized that securing my autonomy demanded careful planning. I opened a bank account in my name, one that my partner wouldn't have access to. I started saving a little here and there, even if it meant foregoing small luxuries. Every dollar represented empowerment. It was a prominent reminder that I was actively laying the groundwork for my own independence. Meanwhile, I began to think about when to make my move. Timing is everything in these situations. I intuitively sensed that weekends tended to ignite my partner's unpredictable behavior, with emotions running high and confrontations more likely. Therefore, a weekday, preferably during the day, seemed ideal. My partner would be at work, wrapped up in a routine where I could slip away unnoticed. This would be my light bulb moment, a point of no return, and I wanted my exit to remain as undisrupted as possible. Another dimension of my escape involved preparing for the emotional aftermath. Leaving a relationship, even a toxic one, incited a swirl of emotions: grief, relief, fear, and excitement. I committed to journaling as a means to articulate my emotions. It was cathartic to externalize my thoughts and feelings on paper, and it helped me process the magnitude of what I was about to undertake. Each entry was not just a record, it was also a manifestation of my strength, a testament to my evolving self-awareness. Through all these plan details, I understood that I needed a contingency for every part of my plan. I crafted variables for different scenarios: what would happen if my partner returned home early, or if my plans were discovered. Each dilemma I envisioned became a puzzle piece that I could address in advance, thus minimizing unpredictability. The sheer complexity of orchestrating my departure was daunting, yet it felt empowering, a stark contrast to the feeling of entrapment I had known for too long. As the day of my departure approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety ripple through me. I compiled my essential items, carefully tucking them away in a bag that I could grab on my way out. It felt surreal, yet exhilarating. My friends had committed to being available post-departure. They would be waiting, ready to embrace me and provide the support I desperately needed. I gave them a vague heads-up of when I'd be leaving, ensuring they would be on standby without raising too much suspicion. Then I meticulously rehearsed what I might say to my partner, even though I knew words often failed in high-stakes moments. Having a script allowed me to mentally prepare for potential confrontations. I plan to keep my responses calm, sticking to the facts in my decision: no apologies, no justifications. I deserve to protect myself, and that meant being assertive without falling into familiar traps of guilt and manipulation. Finally, on the day of my departure, everything felt surreal. I remember standing at the threshold of my home, my heart pounding, but within that pulse I sensed a burgeoning strength. Each beat whispered a reminder: this is your moment, this is your path to freedom. I took a deep breath, gathered all my carefully prepared provisions, and stepped out into the world beyond, a world where I could begin to build my own narrative, one unfettered by fear, manipulation, and despair. As I walked away, I suddenly felt a rush of optimism pulse through me. The journey was only just beginning, but I had taken the first, pivotal step toward reclaiming my autonomy and igniting the flame of true happiness within me. In this act of courage, I was no longer just escaping. I was embracing life and all the possibilities that awaited me on the other side. Leaving a toxic relationship can feel like stepping out from under a dark cloud, but the aftermath can often prove to be as challenging as the decision to leave itself. Imagine taking a leap into the unknown. Every nerve in your body is alive with uncertainty, and the world ahead appears daunting. As I stepped away from the shadows of my former life, I encountered a whirlwind of emotions, a mix of relief, trepidation, and a fragile sense of freedom that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. This paradox is not uncommon. Many find the freedom they sought often comes with its own set of challenges. The initial days post-separation were laden with emotional debris from the relationship I had chosen to abandon. A deluge of memories flooded my mind, weighing heavy with doubt. Was I truly making the right decision? In those first weeks, it felt as if the ghost of my past was a constant companion, whispering taunts of inadequacy and regret. I began to question if I could ever feel whole again, if happiness was truly within my reach. As I engaged with old friends who had stood by patiently during my harrowing journey, I discovered a newfound clarity in their companionship. Through warm conversations and shared laughter, they became beacons of comfort, reminding me of the life that existed outside the confines of my past relationship. Yet with this comfort came painful moments of reflection. Friends asked me about the dynamics of my past, each question peeling back layers of hurt I had worked hard to suppress. Recognizing the depth of my emotional scars proved to be a mixed blessing, as it forced me to confront the darkness I had once tried so diligently to bury. At the same time, it was essential to navigate the external fallout of my decision. There were whispers among acquaintances that circled back to me, thinly veiled judgment masked as concerned inquiry. "I heard you and ex-partner's name split up. Are you okay?" The inquiry felt loaded, fraught with an expectation that I should be devastated, as if they were waiting to see cracks in my facade. This perceived scrutiny invited creeping doubts: did I give up too easily? Did I misinterpret the intensity of my love as something sacred rather than a source of toxicity? Facing these inquiries was a critical part of my journey. I learned that I no longer had to justify my past. Each question helped me reclaim my narrative. I realized my voice held power, turning fragile moments into lessons. Justifying the decision became less about convincing others and more about reinforcing my commitment to self-respect. In conversations with those who truly cared, I found solace. It wasn't just the validation of my choice, but the recognition of my courage that fortified my resolve. The personal fallout was palpable, an emotional hangover, if you will. I struggled with feelings of isolation, missing the connection I had with my former partner. I didn't long for the toxicity, but for the intimacy that once filled my days. That yearning often left me questioning my worth. Was I meant to be alone? Did I deserve genuine affection? The emptiness felt loud, echoing through the corners of my mind and heart. However, amid this internal turmoil, I began to treat myself with the compassion I so readily extended to others. This was no easy feat. Learning to love oneself is often fraught with trials and tribulations. As I continued to navigate the skis of emotional upheaval, I stumbled upon the importance of grounding myself. Practicing self-care, which I had neglected for so long, became both a refuge and a form of rebellion against the inner critic that constantly threatened my self-worth. Simple acts, from taking long walks in nature to indulging in hobbies I had abandoned, became milestones in reclaiming my sense of self. The act of prioritizing my own needs was like watering a plant starved of rain, gentle but necessary for my rebirth. In hindsight, the amalgamation of these experiences, the questioning, the solitude, the introspection, became pivotal to my recovery, painting a tapestry of transformation. Facing the fallout of my decision was not about moving forward seamlessly. It involved embracing the chaos, learning from the tumultuous waves of loss. Eventually, I began stitching together a new identity, one thread at a time, imbued with resilience and self-awareness. Another layer of complexity emerged in reconciling my feelings toward my ex. Forgiveness danced at the edges of my consciousness. It was not about absolving them of their actions, but about freeing myself from the grip of lingering resentment. Understanding that their behavior stemmed from their own pain opened the door to a pivotal realization. In letting go of them, I was reclaiming my narrative. The acknowledgement that every relationship, including toxic ones, seems to teach us profound lessons became a stepping stone toward emotional liberation. Moreover, the realizations from my past prompted a second chance at understanding what I truly valued in relationships moving forward. The tapestry of my previous experiences armed me with better discernment. I could identify emotional highs and lows with a newfound clarity. The memory of the scars remained, sure, but they were no longer a sign of weakness. Instead, they became symbolic of my journey towards wholeness. In this chapter of my life, the aftermath of leaving a toxic relationship was not simply a series of reactions. Rather, it morphed into an active engagement with growth, self-reflection, and healing. Each day and every encounter served as a building block in not only facing the fallout, but reassembling my life with newfound vigor. The remnants of my past would remain, yet they transformed from burdens into lessons of survival and strength. In embracing this reality, I slowly painted a bright future with the strokes of self-discovery, authenticity, and a deep understanding that true happiness begins when we choose ourselves, despite the chaos left behind. Rediscovering myself was a journey both exhilarating and daunting, a labyrinth of self-exploration that felt as ancient and intricate as the secrets of the Inca Empire hidden in the misty Andes. After leaving the suffocating confines of a toxic relationship, I stood alone, a blank slate populated with questions. Who was I really? A simple query, yet the weight of it felt monumental, like trying to unearth ancient artifacts buried beneath layers of history. In the beginning, I didn't even know where to start. The very essence of my being had been overshadowed by someone else's narrative. This was a common pattern. I soon realized how easily we allow others to define us, to carve our identities into molds that never fit. It was time to break the mold, to remap the contours of my soul. But first, I needed to embrace the quiet chaos that often accompanies self-discovery. I found solace in the concept of self-exploration, an idea rich with possibilities. It became my heartfelt invitation to venture into the landscapes of who I was outside of any relationship. I took long walks in the park, surrounded by the gentle rustling of leaves. Each step felt like a journey into an uncharted territory of emotions. With each footfall, the whispers of my past faded, replaced by a growing understanding of my own desires, aspirations, and fears. I started journaling, pouring thoughts onto pages that seemed both terrifying and liberating. Writing was a portal into my feelings, a way to lay bare the havoc that had been wreaked on my self-esteem. I penned down my dreams, the ones I had suppressed, and the ambitions that had long lingered in the shadows. As the ink flowed, so too did my resolve. I rediscovered the small joys that once lit up my world: the thrill of reading a good book, the joy of creating art, the tranquility of meditation. Each activity was a thread weaving a fresh tapestry of self-awareness and appreciation. However, self-exploration is rarely a straight path. It twists and turns, often leading to confrontations with past traumas. I soon found myself revisiting painful memories I had long buried. I had to ask myself, what events shaped my perceptions of love and self-worth? Just as historians sift through layers of sediment to uncover the hidden truths of a civilization, I too embarked on an excavation of my past. Memories surfaced, moments where my worth was minimized, times when I felt voiceless. Confronting these shadows was daunting, yet the act was essential for healing. Each recollection was like dusting off a relic, revealing something beautifully imperfect, an authentic part of me. I sought wisdom from various sources. I immersed myself in self-help books, attended workshops, and engaged in thoughtful conversations with those who had traveled similar roads. As I absorbed different perspectives, I realized that self-exploration is not a solitary endeavor. It can be incredibly communal. Each voice added layers to my understanding, much like the interwoven stories of countless civilizations over epochs. I found myself reflecting deeply on the connections we share, the influence of community, and how truly empowering it is to embrace our collective journeys. In parallel, I meditated in nature. There's a profound tranquility that comes from aligning oneself with the earth's rhythm. The whispers of the wind and the chorus of chirping birds became my muses, guiding me on this quest of rediscovery. With each session, I learned to listen, not just to the outside world, but also to the symphony of my internal dialogues. This practice helped illuminate the areas I still needed to nurture within myself. My confidence began to bloom. I learned to appreciate solitude, finding beauty in my own company. The complex fabric of my emotions began to mend, with threads of self-love stitched into the very core of my being. Yet every journey has its obstacles. Just when I thought I was gaining momentum, insecurities flared, reminiscent of the doubts that had long plagued me. I struggled against a familiar foe, the voice of negativity that whispered I wasn't enough. It seemed ludicrous that I had begun to navigate this journey just to stumble upon old enemies. But I had to remind myself that healing is seldom linear. Like the Inca roads that traverse steep valleys and soar over mountains, my path was inherently crooked and unexpectedly beautiful in its wildness. During this time, I began to engage in activities that frightened me. I signed up for a painting class, despite my previous insecurities about artistic talent. I hiked trails I had once viewed as too daunting, testing not just my physical limits but also my mental resilience. With every brushstroke, every summit conquered, I felt fragments of a stranger shatter, replaced by a woman who was unapologetically myself. It was exhilarating, this dance with newfound passions that reinvigorated both my body and spirit. As months passed, the journey morphed into an unfolding narrative, rich with the textures of self-acceptance. I learned to celebrate both my strengths and my flaws as markers of my unique journey. True happiness began to take root not in the perfect resolution to my past, but in the ongoing journey of learning and adapting, much like the intricate relationship between history's lessons and the myths that bring them to life. Rediscovery, I realized, is an endless cycle. Just when I thought I had unearthed my core, life would challenge me again, requiring me to dig a little deeper. But instead of fearing these challenges, I embraced them as invitations to grow. Each day became an exploration, every interaction a potential mirror reflecting back parts of myself previously obscured. Suddenly, I understood that true happiness wasn't a destination, it was the process itself, the willingness to explore, confront, and embrace every aspect of existence. And while my journey began with me breaking away from toxicity, it blossomed into a grand adventure through the labyrinth of self, revealing the multifaceted and vibrant life that was waiting for me to claim it. All I had needed was the courage to step into my own light, leaving behind the shadows that once defined my world. When I finally decided to walk away from that toxic relationship, I felt as if I had torn a painful chapter from my life but had yet to understand that this was merely the prologue to a new beginning. Embracing true happiness isn't just flicking a switch, it's more akin to planting a seed that requires nurturing over time. Have you ever noticed how an oak tree rises magnificently from a tiny acorn? Just as that acorn holds the potential of greatness within it, we often carry within ourselves the capacity for joy and fulfillment that can take root and flourish with the right care. The first essential step in building a life free from the shadows of toxicity was recognizing that true happiness starts within. I used to believe that my happiness was tied to the approval or presence of another person. That realization was daunting. There's a myth, a narrative that has been woven through the fabric of many cultures, where the hero must first face their fears before they can claim their treasure. Well, the treasure in this journey was self-acceptance, and the fear was the daunting task of confronting my own emotions and expectations. As I embraced the solitude that came with my newfound freedom, I began the serious work of reflection, taking time to understand what truly made me tick, what ignited my passions, and what filled me with that elusive sense of joy. Journaling became my trusty companion in this phase of self-discovery. Each entry was a small conversation I had with myself. I wrote about my dreams, my fears, the things I wished I had done differently, and the lessons I had learned. With each stroke of the pen, I began to unearth the parts of myself that had long been silenced. It felt a lot like unearthing artifacts from a long-buried civilization. Every piece I uncovered told a story and revealed a facet of who I was. But understanding myself was just the beginning. I had spent so much of my energy catering to someone else's needs, smoothing over conflict, and molding my identity to fit the expectations of my partner. Now, I had to learn how to focus that energy inward. This meant delving into activities that stirred my soul, like hiking on sun-drenched trails where the wind whispered sweet nothings among the trees, or immersing myself in books that transported me to other realms, full of vibrant characters and inspiring tales. I remember the first time I visited a local art gallery alone, wandering from painting to painting, soaking in the creativity, allowing inspiration to awaken parts of my spirit that had gathered dust. Disentangling my sense of self from my past relationship was like a caterpillar breaking free from its cocoon. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, it requires patience and perseverance. I started to set boundaries, not just with others, but with myself. I would ask myself, does this action align with who I want to be? This simple question became a guiding principle. I learned that it was entirely okay to say no to what no longer served me and yes to the opportunities that invoked excitement and curiosity in my life. Perhaps one of the most significant components of my journey toward happiness was surrounding myself with a support system. I began reaching out to friends and family whom I had previously drifted away from during my relationship. It was almost surreal how easily the laughter flowed when I reconnected with those who knew me before I learned to hide parts of myself. I discovered that sharing my experiences, my laughter, and yes, even my tears was essential for healing. In those moments, I realized something profound: joy multiplies when shared. As I ventured further along this path of rediscovery, I engaged with the world in ways I had never imagined. I signed up for pottery classes, where I learned to mold clay with my hands, an act that symbolized the power of creation and facilitated a tangible representation of my journey. I put myself in situations that felt uncomfortable but exhilarating, volunteering at local shelters, where giving back helped me acknowledge the beauty of community and interconnectedness. It was then that I Learn the value of empathy in cultivating happiness, not just for myself but for those around me. Meditation also emerged as a vital tool. At first, it felt challenging to embrace silence, but over time I learned to appreciate the stillness between thoughts, a canvas for peace. Connecting with my breath taught me the importance of being present in each moment, allowing me to shed the weights of the past and the anxieties of the future. This practice of mindfulness became a steady foundation upon which I could build my life. Through this journey, I realized that true happiness isn't a destination, it's a fluid state of being. Like the changing tides of the ocean, happiness ebbs and flows, responding to the circumstances of life. I learned the importance of compassion for myself, understanding that there would be days when shadows might creep back in, moments of doubt when old habits might rear their heads. That was part of the process, acknowledging these feelings without judgment, understanding their transient nature, and gently guiding myself back towards light. As I continue to build this life free from shadows, I find joy not just in the grand accomplishments but in the subtle beauty of everyday moments, sipping coffee while watching the sunrise, laughing with friends, dancing in my living room, or simply appreciating the sweetness of silence. Each moment serves as an opportunity to cultivate gratitude, reminding me that happiness thrives in acknowledgement, appreciation, and love, not just for others but for myself. In essence, embracing true happiness means wholeheartedly accepting the journey, every twist, every turn, and every revelation. My path may not always be clear, but each step taken in my newfound freedom leads me closer to my truest self, teaching me that happiness is not something to chase, but rather a state of being that I can cultivate within. As I conclude this chapter, I hope to inspire anyone caught in the grips of toxicity to embrace their own journey toward true happiness. Remember, the brightest days often follow the darkest nights, and the potential for joy is already within each of us, waiting to be awakened. Sharing my story is not just an act of catharsis, it's a beacon of hope for anyone who finds themselves tangled in the webs of a toxic relationship. There's a power in vulnerability, in putting my experiences into words, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there feels just as trapped as I did once. It's essential to remember that toxic relationships can come disguised as love. At first, I was swept away by the whirlwind of affection, compliments, and promises. Like many, I believed the narrative we create around love, that it should feel exhilarating and all-consuming. However, the delusion of this ideal soon faded, revealing layers of manipulation and control masquerading as concern. The emotional intensity that initially felt captivating morphed into suffocation. I sensed something was inherently wrong but remained rooted in fear, unable to confront the reality that my happiness was being siphoned away. As I began to peel back the layers of my relationship, I realized there was a parallel between my experience and the tales of courageous figures in history. Think about the early paragons of freedom and independence, the rebels who stood against oppression in their time. Just like those historical narratives, my journey toward liberation wasn't simply about breaking free. It was about cultivating the courage to rewrite my narrative. The moment I decided to open up and share my story, something transformative occurred. I started with my closest friends, many of whom listened without judgment, echoes of empathy gripping their expressions. Within this safe space, I discovered a community of individuals who not only understood my pain but offered their own stories of struggle and survival. Their experiences wove into the fabric of my own, creating a rich testament to resilience. It became clear that I was not alone in this, that enduring love does not always equate to enduring suffering. We shared moments of recklessness, laughter through tears, and even the bittersweet comfort of knowing we were not the first to traverse this tumultuous path. Drawing strength from these conversations, I felt a burgeoning desire to reach out and inspire those who might be encountering their own crossroads. I envisioned a broader audience, individuals watching perhaps from behind a screen, silently grappling with the constraints of their situations. It was then that I began to write, sharing my experiences through social media platforms, blog posts, and smaller community meetings. Each word I wrote became a stepping stone toward healing, a tool crafted not just for myself but for anyone who needed encouragement to let go of their shadows. But how do we inspire someone to take that first leap into the unknown? This question became a crucial part of my ongoing dialogue. It requires acknowledging fear, of course. Fear can paralyze or propel us forward. It's often the greatest hurdle. My story resonated with many because I didn't shy away from the fact that the fear of leaving can be as daunting as the manipulation itself. As I shared my narrative, the reactions were profound. Some responded with gratitude, stating that I had given voice to their own struggles, while others appeared skeptical, unsure if they too could possibly take that brave step. This dichotomy puzzled me at first. Why does fear keep so many shackled when the promise of freedom is merely at their fingertips? It's a complex web to unravel, one that intertwines with culture, upbringing, and personal history. As we delve deeper, we realize that every story is a distinct intersection of the personal and the collective, borrowing threads from the overarching tapestry of human experience. Encouragingly, I noticed shifts in how people responded. Some began to take small steps. Maybe they reached out to a friend or journaled about their experiences, initial moves toward liberation. I found immense clarity in being part of this process, a participatory role in a larger narrative. Individuals would share their breakthrough moments even if they seemed minuscule, a verbatim quote they resonated with, a self-affirmation they began to harness as a mantra. Each small victory contributed to the broader notion that change isn't necessarily instantaneous. It unfolds gradually, brick by brick, dialogue by dialogue. Facilitating conversations became my mission. I organized weekly meetups, inviting individuals who wanted a judgment-free space to discuss the challenges of leaving toxic dynamics. Every gathering morphed into a sanctuary of honesty, stories poured out, not always polished, revealing the rawness of our emotional truths. Together, we began to dismantle the misconceptions surrounding these relationships. The notion that love should be earned or that pain is an inescapable part of devotion. With every discussion, I felt the fire of inspiration spreading. It was contagious. Armed with shared experiences, we began to craft our individual paths towards thriving. As one rekindled a passion for painting, another took up a new sport, and yet another dove into surprise career opportunities. These tales became testaments that breaking free doesn't mean losing oneself. Instead, it fosters self-discovery and an opportunity to flourish in ways previously bound by fear. Through this journey, I realized that sharing my story was more than catharsis. It became a call to arms for those submerged in toxic relationships. It was an invitation to action, a nudge toward recognizing your intrinsic worth, a promise that you deserve the fullness of joy. I often look back on those early days, when cracking open the door to share my experiences felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. It was scary, yet stepping into the unknown brought with it a vibrant sense of community. So let me urge you, if you recognize a little piece of yourself in this narrative, take a moment to reflect on what embracing your own story could mean. Breaking free and thriving is just for the brave. It's for anyone yearning for a life painted with authenticity and joy. Your journey is your own, but it resonates within a larger story, one that can inspire countless others still facing their struggles. In sharing, we heal. In healing, we thrive. The shadows of the past might linger, but they no longer define your trajectory toward true happiness. That is not just a hope, it can be your reality.